Welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 163. This is, inshallah, my penultimate Seerah session from here in Pakistan. And thanks for people who've been listening in all this time. Going back to what we did last week, we did some minor expeditions and battles that happened before the Battle of Mutah, inshallah, which we'll cover over the next 2 or 3 weeks. One of them was that where the Muslims were walking so much they shredded their sandals and their shoes, and they had to wrap their feet with rags. They did also the story of Abdullah bin Bishr, who was shot by 3 arrows whilst on duty but praying as a sentry. But he didn't flinch. We talked about how there was one Muslim who killed a mushrik called Mardas bin Nahik, who professed to be a Muslim, said Islam and the Prophet was really angry with Osama and asked him, did you open up that chap's heart before you killed him? We also mentioned the story of Bishr bin Saad, who led a few platoons. Abdullah bin Rawaha, he led a group of 30 that intercepted Bashir bin Razam al-Yahudi, who was plotting an attack against the Muslims. And inshallah, we'll come back on to Abdullah bin Rawaha this week, inshallah. Talk about Abu Hadrat, who promised as meher his wedding gift a lot of money, and the Prophet was angry with him for that, but then later on sent him on an expedition where he managed to get a lot of booty, and with that he managed to conclude his marriage. And then a similar story to one earlier, a Muslim scout named Jundub was hit by a couple of arrows but remained motionless whilst on the ground, sort of scouting out the enemy. And due to that, they managed to attack, the Muslim platoon managed to attack the perpetrators. And then they managed to escape. Now Allah sent a flood in a dry valley to protect Ali bin Abdullah and his men. The week before that, we did the story of the conversion of Khalid bin Walid ibn Mughira of Bani Makhzum, and that's important because he plays a pivotal role in the Battle of Mutah, which is why it was important to do that in that chronological order. And how Khalid had thought about, moving to Abyssinia, to Rome, but then after witnessing firsthand that Umar al-Qadha, he realized that Islam was completely on the ascendancy and was going to take over. But then when his brother Walid ibn Walid wrote him a letter, that finally pushed him to convert. And then how he and Amr bin al-As and the third Uthman bin Talha came to Medina dressed in their best clothes in order to become Muslim and see the Prophet. So that's the last week or 2. So inshallah, today we'll start the Battle of Mutah, which is probably one of the most significant, but if not the fiercest battle during the time of the Prophet. Although the Prophet didn't personally fight in it. Uhud was very tense for the reasons we've gone through. But this battle, it happened in Jumada Al-Ula in the 8th year of the Hijrah, and it sort of marks a definite shift in the foreign policy of the Prophet and the Muslims, now turning their attention to the Christians, to the Romans, beyond the Arabian Peninsula. So that's quite important, and sort of if you convert it to Western currency, it's about September 629 Anno Domini. And Mutah, it's a village that sort of lies in the geographical area of Greater Syria, or some would say modern Jordan. The battle, like I said, it's preparation for later battles against the Romans. The Prophet ﷺ wanted to implicitly get the send the message essentially to the Muslims that they shouldn't just be content with the Arabian Peninsula. The word needs to spread to the rest of the world. Right? Islam is a global message and must spread outside the Arabian Peninsula. And the Battle of Mutah is a prelude to the Battle of Tabuk, in which the Prophet did participate, but there was no actual fighting against the Romans. They didn't turn up. So, although the Battle of Mutah, we'll go into why it happened in a second, inshallah, wasn't directly aimed at the Romans. It was aimed at another tribe, the Ghassanids. The implication that the Prophet is he's obviously very politically aware. He knows if he attacks the Ghassanids, by implication, he's attacking the allies of the Romans. So it could be tantamount to attacking the Romans. So the Ghassanids have an allegiance with the Romans. They do the bidding in that part of the Near East, the Middle East, for which they get protection from the Romans. So the Prophet is well aware that if he does attack this tribe, even though they're a Christian tribe and they're going to have other Christian tribes, he's also sort of signalling to the Romans that actually, that it's an attack on them because of the way allegiances and alliances are made at the time. So it's laying a psychological foundation to take over the areas of the Levant, Syria, Palestine, that are occupied by the Romans. And the other important thing about the Battle of Mutah is it's the major battle, final major battle before the conquest of Makkah, which is the grand finale, essentially. There are some minor expeditions that happen in between, but it is, as I say, it is one of the highlights of this year in the Seerah. And because of its importance and the number of people that went, 3,000 Muslims, some of the early scholars refrain from calling it Sariyat al-Mutah, so an expedition that's not led by the Prophet is called a Sariyah, but they call it a Ghazwat al-Mutah, right? So they want to sort of elevate it to a higher status battle. Obviously the ones where the Prophet ﷺ is in charge, they're called Ghazwa. But that sort of goes against their own naming convention. If you're going to say Ghazwa is where the Prophet's in charge, you have to stick to that. And at the time of the Sahabi, they didn't call it Ghazwat al-Mutah, even though it's not just any old enemy, it's the Romans, and this is the first time the Muslims are facing a non-Arab or Christian army. The Sahabi used to call it Jaysh al-Umra, so Umara, Jaysh al-Umara, which is the war, the campaign of the leaders, because Prophet appointed 3 leaders, as we've mentioned previously. Some other scholars some of the later scholars called it the war near the Mazar, so Jaysh al-Mazar, meaning sort of the war near the shrine where the 3 shaheed are buried. So that's sort of part of the naming convention, Sariyat al-Mutah, or the Jaysh al-Umara. Another benefit from, byproduct of the Battle of Mutah is that Khalid bin Walid takes over at the end, and it allows, gives him permission to be the leader of the army and show his tactical genius to the rest of the Muslims, and obviously the Prophet ﷺ, and then gets bestowed his title of one of the swords of of Allah, and he gets to see firsthand how the Romans fight, because the Romans did send a battalion or two, so he can sort of see their tactics. And obviously Khalid bin Walid is going to be instrumental in spreading Islam north of the peninsula, and so he's got this sort of battle experience. So that's sort of some of the benefits of the Battle of Mutah, and some of the sort of other issues around it. But getting on to why it actually happened, the Prophet ﷺ, he sent Al-Harith bin Umair Al-Azdi to carry a letter. He sent him on an errand to give a letter to the Roman Emperor, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call Byzantium. And he was to give this letter to the ruler of Bosra. And again, we've talked before when he was sending the letters out that you would tend to send it through an intermediary if you're sending it to the emperor themselves. So you'd send it to the king, who would then be allowed to approach the court of the emperor. So carrying a letter to the ruler of Bosra, on his way there, he gets raided, intercepted by Sharhabeel bin Amr al-Ghassani from the Ghassanid tribe, and the platoon led by Sharhabeel, who is the governor of Balqa, also a Christian ally of the Eastern Roman Empire, captures Al-Harith and says, is brought to Sharhabeel and says, who are you? So Al-Harith, he goes, look, I am an envoy, an ambassador. I'm protected by what we would say international law. Here's my letter. You've got to let me go because I'm on my way to the king of Bosra. Then Sharhabeel starts making fun of him, ties him up, mocks him, tortures him, and it's said that he actually beheads Al-Harith himself, personally beheads Al-Harith. And then, as it is sort of now, actually killing an ambassador, an envoy, a messenger like that is a big taboo in international relations. It's just not done. And then, as it is now, if it's an awful crime, a war crime, you could say, what we would say, but it's like declaring war. It's tantamount to a declaration of war. If you kill the envoy, that is really flexing your muscles in superiority and arrogance over the other person, basically saying, look, I've killed your envoy, what are you going to do now? You can't do anything. And the Prophet, obviously, when he heard about his envoy Al-Harith being killed and the manner in which he was killed, the Prophet was shocked with that news, and then he ordered an army of 3,000 to be mobilized, or as many people as would volunteer. And 3,000 is how many volunteered for this expedition up north to Mutah to take revenge for the killing of Al-Harith. And again, from a head of state's point of view, and the state having gone through some very precarious times in recent memory up until the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he can't be seen to let this slide. Because if he allows this to slide in some way, other people will then start to get more brazen and will push the envelope even further. So the Prophet ﷺ not just has to revenge Al-Harith, he has to send a message to everyone else. This behavior is completely and utterly unacceptable. I'll just pause there for the adhan. 1 second. So yes, the Prophet has to take revenge and send the message out that this type of action cannot be condoned or accommodated in any way, shape, or form. So the Prophet made the public announcement. He wants the Muslims to go to the tribe of the Ghassanids and to extract revenge. No ambiguity. This is the purpose. He's not keeping it secret, straight out. And he needs to let people know, because it's it's at least 2 weeks travel up there, and then 2 weeks there, 2 weeks back. So he has to let them know where they're going, encourage them to volunteer, and let them make the appropriate preparations for that. But the other thing that a lot of scholars have rightly pointed out is that, look, if you're going back 6-7 years, you had about a tenth of that, 313 people, for the Battle of Badr, the first incisive battle. And within 6-7 years, the numbers have increased nearly tenfold. And a year and a half before that, you had the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and they could only muster half that number, 1,400. Here you've got you're announcing a volunteer army, and that volunteer army, many were left behind, and of those that came, 3,000 came. So again, we get a sense of how much Islam is growing, and we talked about that when we did the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Is the fact that actually now, when there is peace and there's no immediate existential threat to the Muslim state, they could do dawah, and people can see Islam, and they're more effective at countering the propaganda against the Muslims, and then people are coming into Islam in droves, and much like today, because we don't have anywhere sort of that even sort of 1/20th of the aspects of implementing the whole of Islam, people can't see Islam, and if they can't see it how it is, it's just theoretical for them, or they get taken in by the propaganda, and sort of the propaganda against us from the non-Muslims, enemies, and quite frankly the propaganda that a lot of the Muslim people do against themselves, in terms of by not living by Islam, exhibiting the qualities of being a good Muslim in an Islamic state. People think, well, that's what Islam is about. And so once you have an Islamic state that practices all of Islam properly, implements it appropriately, and you're able to explain Islam, do dawah, and do appropriate propaganda, you can see how Islam flourishes. So we should make dua that returns quickly within our lifestyle, our lifetime. So 3,000 people have volunteered, and the Prophet then appoints Zaid bin Haritha, previously his adopted son, and we all know about the status of Zaid. I'll come on to that in a second. He appointed him as leader of the army. And then, sort of quite unprecedenting, he appoints 2 other leaders should anything happen. And he may have appointed sort of backup leaders in some of the other battles, but here it's the only time we know where he's actually appointed 3 leaders, and that's why some of the early Muslims called it Jaysh al-Umara, the war of the leaders. So Zayd bin Haritha is the leader of the army that goes up north, and he says if he were to be killed, then Jafar bin Abi Talib should replace him. And Jafer's just fresh back from Abyssinia, living there over a decade. Came back just at the end of the Battle of Khaybar, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah had been concluded, and and the Prophet sending him out, and he sent him out previously on other expeditions, but this is a major one. He said, look, if Zayd dies, then Jafar bin Abi Talib and replaces him. And this is his cousin, his best friend, essentially, that they grew up together. But then he goes, if Jafar is to be killed, then Abdullah bin Rawaha would succeed Jafar. And in another narration, it goes, and if Abdullah bin Rawaha is killed, then let the Muslims choose somebody else. And the Prophet handed the white flag, the banner, to Zayd. And so personally conferring that on to Zayd. And with the specific instructions that they go to reach the scene of where Al-Harith was murdered. So it's explicit why they are there. Then when they're there, they need to invite people to Islam. Invite them, let them profess Islam if they will. So do the da'wah first. If they respond positively, then there's no need for war, no need to exact revenge if they become Muslim. Otherwise, if they don't, then you should fight them, and that's the only alternative left. And then he orders them, fight the disbelievers in the name of Allah. Neither breach a covenant nor entertain treachery, and under no circumstances a newborn, woman, an aging man, or a hermit monk should be killed. Moreover, neither trees should be cut down nor the homes demolished. It's a very explicit rules of war. And again, we've talked about this before. The Prophet would often talk about these rules. So fighting the disbelievers, but do not transgress the bounds. Don't kill children, women, elderly, or monks, and don't sort of recklessly cut down trees or demolish homes, as was often done at the time. So Zaid bin Haritha, we've talked many times before, he is honoured by being the only Sahaba to be named by name in the Qur'an. Right? So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Zayd by name in the Quran. No other Sahabi has that honor. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is referred to implicitly when they're in the cave, for example, and the Prophet said to his companion, but by name only Zayd is mentioned in the Quran. And it said that whenever the Prophet would send an army or a platoon, and Zayd was part of the group, he would always put Zayd in charge. So never was Zayd on an expedition except that he was the leader of that platoon or Sariyah. So, and another narration later on, I think by Aisha, she says that if Zayd had been alive when the Prophet died, then there would have been no one else chosen above him to be the first Khalif. So, as we know, Abu Bakr Siddiq became the first Khalifa, saying if Zayd was alive at the time, it was case closed, no discussion. Everybody would assume that Zayd would take over. And this is Aisha saying that she's the daughter of Abu Bakr Siddiq. And she's saying, so she's giving us an indication of how much the Prophet loved Zayd. And so Jafar bin Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and almost his bestie for so many years, feels a bit sort of slighted by this. I mean, he's been in Abyssinia, he's been doing the Prophet's work over there. He's second in command over there. Well, he's in command over there, but he's the sort of representative of the Prophet. So he feels a bit sort of slightly, I'm your cousin, I'm from your blood, and you're choosing Zayd over me. And the Prophet could sense that from him, and he turns to Jafar and basically says, Jafar said, look, I'm your cousin, and you're choosing Zayd. And the Prophet ﷺ, he then says, look, trying to console him, basically, you don't know, perhaps this is better for you. And obviously we'll see it in the course of the battle, how the Prophet ﷺ was vindicated in this promise that perhaps this is better for you. And then Abdullah ibn Rawaha, we'll mention a bit about him in a second. But the Prophet, it's a Friday, after fajr, he gives them the banner and marches out with them, and he accompanies them to a little sort of raised platform, a mount, a little hillock, which is known as Thanith al-Wada, the hill of farewell. And it's said that this was the place where, when armies were leaving or when they're coming back, the people of Medina would, is their vantage point. It's where they would, stop and bid farewell or welcome the army as they come back. So it's and it has that sort of poignancy if there are, families moving, leaving, where loved ones can say their final goodbyes, etc., etc. And so, all of Medina, as much as possible, would come out to this hill and sort of give the army a proper send-off. And again, it's good morale for the army to be sent off like that, and captures that sort of moment and provides that delineation between. So the preparations, all right, and now this is the start of the army. This is the start of the journey. So the army is bidden farewell by the people of Medina, and they left on a Friday in Jumada Al-Ula. And as they're leaving, Abdullah bin Rawaha, he turns around and he is the poet, one of the chief poets and propagandists for the Muslims, and some say he was actually, in terms of his poetry, he was superior to Hassan bin Thabit, who we've talked about before, who was again one of the official poets. And again, we've mentioned this so many times, poetry is the propaganda tool of the day. It's the main media. If you want to insult people, if you want to curse people, if you want to spread a message, you do it through poetry, effective poetry. It's sort of in recent centuries, the way to get your messages out to the masses, it's poetry, and then it becomes playwriting in the West, writing plays. Then it became the radio, and then TV and film. So these are the media which you see where they're sending out subtle messages or outright propaganda. Nowadays, social media. Now, that's how we get the messages out. That's how you do propaganda. And again, the Muslims currently are lacking behind in mastering the art of propaganda through social media, not to the level that the Western countries or even sort of China or Russia managed to harness the power of social media. But in those days, it was poetry, and the better the poet, the quicker your poetry, the more elevated you would be. And so Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he begins to cry and weep. And so they ask him, well, why are you crying, right? And he basically says, look, it's not it's not because I love this world, nor is it that I'm under a motive of infatuation with the glamour of this life, but rather the words of Allah speaking of the fire are the thing that brings him to tears. And he said, look, I heard the Prophet reciting, there is not one of you but will pass over it, in hell, fire, in hellfire, and this this is with your Lord a decree that must be accomplished. So he's getting a sense of foreboding. He's leaving Medina, and he gets the sense this might be the last time. For him, the trauma of leaving Medina, his town where he's grown up, it reminds him of the trauma that he's going to face when he has to cross over the bridge into Jannah, inshallah. So he's, what great da'is do is using a situation to highlight something from Islam, and genuinely he's feeling moved and touched by this, and he's, being of the poetic and creative kind, he starts to weep. So this crying is not out of fear, but the sort of the vision he's got in his mind of crossing over the sirats of Jahannam. And then he turned around and said, well, what will I do at that crossing? And so, you can see how emotional he is. And then sort of, with that, so another Sahabi cries out, we don't know if it's someone from the army or somebody from the Thaniyat al-Huda, the farewell hill. They shout out, may Allah accompany you and allow you to return safely and soundly, which is what you'd expect them to say. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. Army's going, you have to go safely and come back safely. And then Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he just shows his genius around poetry. He on the spot makes up a poem as a retort for that blessing. And again, that's why he's a master poet. That's why he's a chief propagandist. And sort of the most sort of, you could equate that nowadays to people who are very good modern poets in terms of rhyme. So like your hip hop artists or some other musicians who, will go into free flow poetry, without rehearsing it or planning it or writing it down. They've got that ability to find those verses, those rhymes. So Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he's one of those geniuses. So then he, in Arabic, obviously the translation is more like, as for me, I ask for Allah's forgiveness. So they say, look, may Allah accompany you, return you safely. So they say, as for me, I ask for Allah's forgiveness, and a blow that is mighty that causes my blood to gush out, so that when people pass by my grave, they shall say, Allah guided him to be a warrior, and how rightly guided he was. So this is his earnest hope. He's not yearning to come back safely. These people have grown up with the stories of Islam. He was one of the first Muslims from Medina. He gave the pledge of Aqaba. Right? He's been hearing about high status of a shaheed, and he goes, look, I'm not interested in this world. I want to become a shaheed, and everything that's associated with that, and don't make dua for me to come back safely. My dua to Allah, genuine dua, is that basically, I perish in this battle, and people recognize how much I fought for the sake of Islam. So then, as he's sort of saying this, other people sort of get emotional, and then sort of later on, as they're marching, it takes 2 weeks to get there. He's got on the back of his camel Zaid bin Arqam, right, who was probably sort of mid-teens at this age, so just old enough to go on the battle. He was an orphan that Abdullah bin Rawaha looked after and took care of, and so Zaid grew up in the house of Abdullah ibn Rawaha. And he's riding on the back of Ibn Rawaha's camel, and it said that in one evening as they're riding, Ibn Rawaha he breaks into poetry again. And part of it, he says, look, let me die, O Allah, and be a shaheed. And the whole verses, and again, he's saying this all along the journey. It's at night time. Everyone can hear his poetry, and it's expected as being the poet, that people look up to him for inspiration. And all he's basically saying is, I want to die. I want to become a shaheed. And Zaid bin Haritha, he gets overwhelmed by these verses, and he starts to cry. Bursts into tears, poor lad. So Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he sort of he gently chides Zayd and says, "Oh, stop being such a fool," in a friendly way. Stop being such a fool. What does it matter to you if I'm a shaheed and Allah blesses me, right? For us, people who've been dreaming and yearning, but this is a blessing. What does it matter to you if Allah blesses me with shahada, right? Just look at it. You get to have the camel alone all on the way back. So if I'm a shaheed, you don't have to share your camel; it's yours now. Obviously Zayd bin Arqam remembered that conversation. And obviously, when it did come to pass, he's able then emotionally to, tell that story, which makes it sort of so much more hard hitting. So Abdullah ibn Rawaha. So he's, as I said, he's from the Ansar, one of the early Ansaris. People from Medina to become Muslim. He was at the Treaty of Aqaba, and so he's one of the top Ansari. He's one of the elite, and the Prophet praised him a lot. And in fact, because he was from Medina, one of the senior Ansari, the Prophet chose Abdullah ibn Rawaha to bring the good news of the victory at the Battle of Badr. And as the Muslims have said this, as they're approaching Medina after the decisiveness of Badr, obviously the people of Medina are really anxious, so the Prophet sends ahead Abdullah ibn Rawaha, who, again, he's the poet, he's the official propagandist, he's well known for that, and people will listen to him, people know him, this is his city, and he sends him with the good news, tell the people what happened. And the Prophet sends him on his own camel for that reason. Go quickly, tell everyone what a mighty victory it was. And so Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he sort of gallops in on the Prophet's camel, and he's, saying what happened. So and so is dead. So and so is dead, and he's really, poeticizing the battle and really being very exuberant in the victory. And then we talked about how the Munafiqun were really upset at hearing the news, at the fact that the Muslims had won, and they tried to spin it and say, look, he's gone crazy, right? How can all these people die? Look, rather he's delirious. The Prophet ﷺ has died, and you can tell that because he's even riding the Prophet ﷺ's camel, right? Or they don't want to say the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad's camel, So Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he has this, elite status, and we mentioned how he was one of the official propagandists, poets of the Muslims, alongside Hassan bin Thabit. And there are some narrations to say that the quality of the poetry from Abdullah ibn Rawaha was superior to that of Hassan ibn Thabit, although Hassan was really good as well. And another narration about Abdullah ibn Rawaha is that Prophet once specifically said, what a great man Abdullah ibn Rawaha is, right? And I think on another occasion, when the Prophet is giving a bayan or a khutbah, some people came and the Prophet told them to sit down. He's walking into the mosque at the time, and he hears the Prophet's words, sit down, and on the door of the mosque he just sits down. And the Prophet made a dua for him when he saw that. During in the previous year, during the Umrah al-Qada, he was again reciting poetry, and one of whilst they're in ihram doing the Umrah, and Umar bin al-Khattab got quite annoyed with him and says basically, look, Ibn Rawaha, how dare you sing poetry in front of the Prophet, and not just that, whilst you're in ihram, and not just that, while you're in Makkah, layer upon layer upon layer of what he saw inappropriate behavior. And the Prophet says, no, let him be, because in truth his words are more painful to the Quraysh than arrows, as if they were being shot from the heavens. So basically saying, look, he's reciting this really powerful poetry in favor of Islam, in favor of Allah, in favor of the Muslims, and all the Quraysh who are locked in their houses, they can overhear this, right? And he's saying how because of their then visceral hatred of Islam and the Prophet and the Muslims, these sweet words would be so painful to them. And we saw that, and we just mentioned it, and how Khalid bin Walid really, after seeing the show of strength during the Umrah al-Qada, he said, look, this is it, this is the end game, the beginning of the end game. Just one final short story then, and this again just relates to Ibn Abbas, the son of Abbass. So it's a Friday. He's volunteered to go on the battle, but then it's fajr time, and he's having he's got his a horse or his camel and everything ready, but he's having an internal discussion. What should I do? If I leave with them early, then that's fine, I can go, or I can perhaps get a lot of sawab by staying until Jummah, praying with the Prophet, listening to his Jummah, and then I'll go straight from the mosque and join the army, because the army, they travel slowly. He's just one person on a horse. He'll be able to catch them up within a day or a day and a half. So the army's left just after Fajr. He says, look, after Dhuhr I'll go straight away, after Jummah. So he decides to stay and wait and pray Jummah with the Prophet. Just think about the blessings you can have praying Jummah with the Prophet in the Prophet's mosque. And then Jummah finishes, and the Prophet sees Ibn Abbas, says, well, what are you doing here? Didn't you volunteer to go? Why haven't you left? And Ibn Abbas says, honestly, look, I wanted to go, but then I thought, why not pray with you, and then I can catch them up. That's not a problem. So the Prophet, he sort of gave a very instructive comment. He said, look, if you were to give all the sadaqah of all the money in the world, gather up all the money in the world, give it as sadaqah, you'll never be able to catch the reward of having left early with the army. So again, putting us, thinking of how much reward there will be associated with him saying basically that doesn't compare to actually those few hours of having left early, being with the Ummah, being with the army, being in the Jama'ah of the army, and supporting each other on that vital mission. Just that is such a huge reward in the eyes of Allah, and as righteous as it is to pray Jummah with the Prophet, doesn't compare to going on jihad like that. you leave with them, leave on time, and you do it properly. And and again, what would happen if everyone thought like that? I'm better than so and so. I'll leave after this. I'll leave after this good deed. I'll leave after that. No, it's an appointed time to leave. You go, and that is how it is. So the bigger reward is to be part of the ghazwa, the army, right? Over and above the smaller reward of the Jummah, praying Jummah with the Prophet. So just putting things into perspective. Anyway, I'll finish there, inshallah. So that's the Muslim army marching north, and they've now sort of left, and Ibn Abbas, being the last straggler after Jummah, leaves and catches up with them. So anyway, inshallah, until next time, do remember us and the Ummah in your du'as, and do take care of yourself, stay well, stay healthy, stay safe, wash your hands, wear a face mask, etc., etc. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَلَا سَوْإِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Jazakallah khair, everybody. Assalamu alaikum.